So you want to play a beautiful factory builder that only has the minor inconvenience of the sun blowing up every now and then and raining fire upon the entire planet, and the occasional attack by a spider, then this game might be for you. Hey, HTDA, and today I have my review of StarRupture for you guys. This game went into early access just a couple of weeks ago. I recently finished the content that is in there, and this game is probably best described as a survival slash factory builder game. Now, for those of you who are just here for the conclusion, let me start out with that to save you some time. I think this game is pretty good, but it's also not perfect, and it's definitely not done yet. So, while you will probably get at least 30 or 40 hours of enjoyment out of this game, and honestly, that is a pretty decent amount of content for a game that only costs about 20 bucks at the moment, it's an incomplete game for sure, and it also has some other drawbacks that might turn some people off. First of all, let me start with a couple of very positive things about this game. First of all, the game looks amazing. The terrain is just gorgeous. The looks and views you'll get just from looking over your factory as you approach the edge of a cliff or something like that is stunning. The natural environments are great. Long story short, this game is pretty stunning from a visual perspective. The factory building part of this game is actually pretty decent as well. The game is definitely going to have to refine a couple of things during the early access to really make this up to the same standards as some of the other games like Satisfactory. But the mechanics in place are pretty interesting. For example, you have rails instead of conveyor belts, and these rails are smart. So things are only going to be transported across a belt if they actually have somewhere to go. So you will not have to worry about your belts getting completely cluttered. You can also interconnect belts with different resources and they will sort themselves out. Long story short, there's a lot of opportunity there to experiment with. And even though the mechanics are a bit incomplete, even in the current state, they're quite fun to work with. However, it is very fair to say that the factory building part of this game also is one of the areas where significant improvements are still to be made. For example, there's no blueprint mechanic in the game, so when you set up a couple of hundred machines and you have to put different inputs in those machines and outputs to be organized, etc., you're going to be spending a lot of time kind of replacing the same things over and over again. That's honestly not a big of problem due to how the mechanics of this factory game work, because unlike most games where you have to continuously expand and keep producing more and more stuff, in this particular game you only need to produce certain amounts of materials until you move on to the next material, but then you don't really need those older materials anymore unless they're an input for the new stuff you're trying to make. That also means that you can get away with smaller factories than you would in most other games, especially early on. Now, I do have to say at the same time, near the end of the game, especially near the end game of the early access at least, you need so much of the end game products that I feel that it's probably going to be retuned at some point. Right now, it is just there to keep you busy. At the same time, it's not all bad. There are a lot of good things in this game as well when it comes to the factory building. For example, the fact that you unlock a drone fairly early on that allows you to kind of fly around your factory and build things from the air rather than having to be standing on top of things while you build them from a first person perspective. So that makes building things a lot easier. The snapping to the grid, etc., also makes connecting buildings fairly easy. I've had a few bugs with that, I'll have to admit, but nothing really game breaking or to the extent that it really became annoying. So let me dive a little bit in the core mechanics of this game and the story behind it that will probably decide whether or not you will actually like this game, even if you're into factory games. Because other than the factory building part of this game, you are on this planet to pay off your debt to society, and a lot of people went before you and tried to do that. Stuff went wrong, and that means that they're now no longer alive. And there's ruins on this planet that you can go and explore. The exploring part, as well as the story related to that, I think is actually pretty good. There are some voice actors in this game. There's 4 different characters that you can pick from, but you can freely switch between them, so you're not locked into anything. I would recommend, by the way, that you pick the engineer because that is by far the most fun character. But if you're going to go out exploring, you'll soon find that there's other creatures on this planet that do not like you being there. And this is where the combat system comes in. It's basically a lot of first-person shooter stuff. You can get some different guns, a shotgun, or assault rifle, a pistol, etc. And yeah, you're going to have to do a lot of fighting against these enemies. All of those enemies are some form of spider at the moment, so if you spiders are not your thing, well, you might want to stay away from this one. The combat itself, I did everything solo. It is doable, but it does get a little bit repetitive at some point. The good news is that this game is also designed to be played with multiple players. So that's where there's 4 characters. You can all pick a different character and do this together. Doing this together definitely makes things easier because, well, getting swarmed is the most complicated part about the combat. The enemies die pretty easily with a couple of exceptions, but there's just a lot of them. The exploration on this planet is going to be complicated by another core mechanic, namely the fact that the sun is going to explode every now and then. Or I should be saying the star of this system is going to rupture every now and then, hence the name of the game. What this means is that basically the entire planet will catch on fire. The effect looks really, really cool, by the way. But if you're outside at the moment that happens, you are going to die. You don't die permanently. You are able to get your stuff back as well. But generally speaking, it's an inconvenience if you actually die when that happens, and you kind of want to avoid that. At the same time, just after one of these ruptures, the entire planet will look like it's completely burned down. Well, it is burned down. And that also means that the creatures won't be there. So if you have a particular place that there's a lot of creature there that you want to reach, at that point you have about 10 minutes time to run in, get whatever you need to get, and run right back out again. So for those of you who aren't too much into combat, you can avoid some of it at least by timing your exploration properly. The rupture mechanic also explains why you can't just build your base everywhere, because you will need to protect your base against this fire damage basically. Don't worry about your factory really getting destroyed or anything like that, but you do want to keep an eye on the protections you have in such a way that your factory will keep working properly when a rupture happens. The rupture has a nice benefit as well, by the way. If you drop random stuff on the ground, for example, resource you no longer need, they will be burned away by this. So there's no reason to run around the entire map to clean everything up. The rupture will take care of that. The story behind the game is actually pretty decent as well. There's a lot of reading that you need to do in terms of terminals and stuff like that you find, and iPads, etc., that have some story in it. If you're not into that, you don't really need to do it. It's purely optional. The most important gameplay moments that relate to the story are fully voiced. The characters that you play are voiced over as well. There's actually quite a bit of banter between the characters, even if you're just playing by yourself. They act as if they're all there, and they talk to each other over the comm signals. And it's really funny. There were quite a few moments, especially I had with the engineer, which is by far my favorite character, by the way, where she was literally saying things that I was thinking several times, like maybe a dozen times during the game. So that was kind of awesome and very well done. The voice acting itself, I have to say, is pretty decently done. Now, there are a couple of things in this game that I think really need to be improved before the full release, and they probably will be, but it's worth calling them out right now. So, first of all, this game has a fixed map, and there's a lot of verticality in the map with sloping hills and stuff like that, that make it pretty hard to build a nice looking flat base. That's probably by design. However, you can build buildings on a sloped area. There will be some pillars popping out of your buildings that allow you to do that. It is pretty limited, however, how steep those can be, and especially once you get to the edge of how far out you can build, you kind of get these weird looking floating platforms that just don't look very good. I'm not sure if it's a bug or if that's intended behavior, but all in all, I think that is something that can be improved. At the same time, there's also buildings that you can raise and lower, and the UI is not very clear about how you're supposed to do that. In fact, there are several things in the game that the UI simply doesn't tell you that you can do. So for example, you can shift between different types of tiles. You can have buildings be on larger foundations or smaller foundations, depending on what you want. There's, I think, one building in the game that tells you you can do that in the menu, But then all the other buildings that apparently also have that option don't show that they have that same option once you try to build them. There are also rail connectors that you use to split off your rails from one building to another that you can raise and lower. Um, but the game isn't very clear about how you are supposed to do that. So if you overlook that initially, you're going to be struggling a lot more than you need to in order to find that out. These are, I think, things that can be very easily dealt with a bit more extensive tutorial or maybe better UI placement or maybe some pop-ups that tell you literally like, hey, you can do this, you should know this. But for the moment, you're kind of left to yourself to find that out. There's also a couple of good things I think about the UI, even though some of the things are not explicitly told to you. This game has a double jump, so you can kind of jump and then get another boost to get a bit higher, which is really nice to get around the terrain. And this game actually also has a dash, so you can kind of shift forward really quickly to avoid enemies and things like that. All in all, that makes you very mobile, but I don't think the dash is actually explained anywhere in the game, and the double jump is also not explained clearly enough. So if you're not used to games having that option, you might not even try jumping twice and never find that out. On a positive note, dealing with power in this game is very easy, maybe even a bit too easy. So you don't have to run around, gathering leaves or making fuel or stuff like that that you need to do in some other factory games. Usually not my favorite hobby, to be honest. But in this game, no, you do need power, but it's very easy to set that up. You also only have a couple of building materials that are going to be covering like 95% of the stuff you want to build. So as long as you keep your stockpiles on those two materials up, you'll be fine. And that allows you to quite freely build your base. You also get a full refund of those building materials if you delete a building. So, you can just tear down your entire factory if you want and completely rebuild it because you found a new layout that you like better. That will take you some time, but at least you don't have to worry about resources. Speaking of resources, they are all infinite in this game as well, so you don't have to worry about them running out. There's a couple of last things I do need to note that I think are really annoying in the current state of the game and that I really hope they will adapt somewhere down the line. Now, first of all, the drone you have that you can use to kind of build your factory from the sky is awesome. However, it stops working the moment you get a warning that a rupture is coming in. This is probably to make sure that you know that that rupture is coming in. It's kind of a push from the developers like, hey, stop building and get to safety. But when you're building your factory, you're probably going to be like right next door of safety anyway. The fact that this drone then stops working makes it really annoying to just, continue building for another minute or so. It's kind of a bit forced upon you that you need to stop building and go and hide. I would very much prefer that even if they keep the fact that the drone gets temporarily disabled, if they keep it in, that you can just re-enable it if you want to keep building. I mean, it's at your own risk, of course. There's another weird thing related to the rupture, where there's a certain resource, sulfur, in the game, that you cannot actually access unless you do it right after a rupture. Why? I don't know. It basically tells you like this is unfriendly terrain, you can't build here when there's like gas and stuff. But since you can actually build bases in there, though apparently those bases can resist those gases and corrupting materials. So why can't I just build them there at any time? I don't know. It's a weird mechanic, and you actually have a pretty small window after a rupture in order to build these things. I don't know why it's in there. And things that I don't know why they're in the game brings me to my last point, and that's the survival mechanics. Now, this game has you eat and drink in order to stay alive, which in and of itself is not the worst type of mechanic to have in a game. I'm just not entirely sure why it's in this one. So the food that you need and the drink that you need in order to survive is pretty much everywhere, right from the starting area. So it's not hard to get. You also don't really run out of your food and drink levels that quickly that you have to do it all the time or anything like that, which makes me wonder why it's in there to begin with. It's kind of a bit of busy work, and especially after day after day after day of playing it, it gets a little bit annoying. There's also a leveling system in the game that is a little bit undercooked at the moment. So as you run around and you fight monsters and stuff like that, you get better at that stuff. And you'll unlock the ability to plant some upgrade modules like into your body to become better at things. I would highly prefer it if those were just research items that you could unlock in some way, or I don't know, permanent unlocks that you could get in some other way. Maybe by building them for yourself. I don't know. It's a factory game after all. Is it a bad thing about the game? No, not really, but it's also not very interesting. So hopefully that will either be expanded upon in the future so it becomes more interesting, or, it's just taken out. I don't think anyone will really miss it. To summarize, I think this game is pretty good, honestly, but not everyone is going to like it in the current state, especially due to the high amount of combat. Now, when you look at the roadmap, there is a lot more coming. So at $20, this game already provides you a lot of content just for that price point. But there's going to be more wildlife being added in the roadmap. There are going to be new buildings, new combat mechanics, more exploration mechanics even. So that might solve some of the issues I previously mentioned. The map that we currently have access to is only a small portion of the map that we will have in the final version of the game. So obviously that is going to be expanded. You can already see some of the interesting locations you will be able to go to later on. You just can't reach them because the radiation blocks you. You will die before you get there. There's going to be more levels to the corporations. There's going to be more, basically more technologies and stuff like that in the game, new resources, more story. Long story short, this game is far from finished, which by itself might be a reason not to play it, but there is already a lot of it available and it is quite good as long as you can overlook some of the downsides. Let me know in the comments, did I miss anything? Is there anything you want to know about this game? I will be following the development because I think this is going to be one of the larger up-and-coming games in this particular genre if they go the right direction. So I will definitely be covering it. So make sure that you like the video and subscribe to the channel if that sounds interesting to you. Last but not least, I will be making some guides on this game as well, so if you want to benefit from my experience, then by all means check those out. There's a couple of live streams of this game as well on the channel, so if you want to see some more gameplay, check those out. And either way, if you are still here, you are awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.